So we mentioned that the three tenets of statistics are variability, inference, and probability. And now we want to look at one of the things we can do to see if we can get some information even within variability. So we'll be using the sigma or summation notation, and here is an example of what I mean by that. Suppose we have these 13 numbers here. So here are the 13 numbers, and let me label them x1, x2, etc. through x13. So we'll use the subscripts to denote the individual numbers. Now, what we want to do is take their sum, which if you just add these 13 numbers up, you'll get that it's 38.35. Now, the way we're going to denote it is by using this sigma notation. So that's the capital letter sigma. It's a capital S in Greek, and there it is. So we're going to have I, because there's 13 numbers, I is going to run from 1 to 13. So we'll set this equal to 13 in our current application. And so I assume that you understand this. If you don't, pause here and find some source where you can read up about this. For example, if you go to Wikipedia and look up the capital sigma notation, you will get a nice review of what this is. So, okay. Now, once we've got this notation, we can now formally define the mean by dividing the sum of the numbers by however many of them there are. So, for example, if there's n in general, we'll take their sum. So there's their sum. And then we'll divide by n, because there's n of them. And this is the mean. And the mean is a measure of central tendency. It sort of tells us the center of these numbers, where the center of the numbers is. So going back to our example, the sum was 38.35. There were 13 numbers. And so if we divide by 13, we get that the mean is 2.95. So the mean of these numbers is 2.95, and that's roughly the middle of where the numbers are. Now, let's take a look at some of the variables in our data set. Here's 10 of them, the first 10 of them. So at the first visit, the age, there were 4,434 people came, and the age had a mean of 49.83, so roughly 50. So the average age was about 50. The systolic blood pressure, let's skip sex for a minute. The systolic blood pressure was 134. The diastolic averaged out at 84. Current smokers, now here the current smokers was yes, no, was a 0-1 variable. So this tells us that roughly 48% of the people in the study had the value 1. The other 52% had the value 0. So if 1 means smoker, that means that there were 48% smokers. Same thing with sex, because sex is also a dichotomous variable, except you remember sex took on the values 1 and 2. So what this says is that 55% of the sex 1 at visit 1 had the value 2. So 2 meant female. Roughly 55% of this data set was female. Sig per day averaged at 8. Now be careful with this one. We'll come back and look at this one later. But there were a lot of people who weren't smokers. You see, we have that 52% are non-smokers. So what does this actually mean here? BMI averaged at 26. Diabetes, very small. This, once again, it's a 0-1 variable. So roughly 3%, 2.5% were at the value 1, which means they had diabetes. And the heart rate averaged about 75, and the glucose averaged about 81.6. Now, be careful, because there were roughly 400 people or so who did not report their glucose level at the first visit. So at least by looking at this column here, the mean, we get an idea about where these variables are centered.